Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning, morning.
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 Colleagues, good morning. It's Umang from the NABC. Just some quick technical notes. This meeting is being run via a normal Zoom platform and not in a webinar format. So please can I ask you to mute your mics and not to use your videos. Only speakers will use their videos. And on your top right-hand corner, if you can adjust your view to speaker view, so you'll see the speaker only. And you can post your questions via the chat function at the bottom. And our moderator, Mr. Murugan, will then pose those questions. So please allow me to hand over to our moderator, Mr. Alan Murugan, who will lead the session. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to this information sharing session between the South African Board for Sheriffs and the National Bargaining Councils. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our Executive Manager, Mr. Jody van Beek. As I said, the Executive Manager of the South African Board for Sheriffs, a person who's got a very huge responsibility ensuring that the mandate of the South African Board for Sheriffs is achieved. And with her comes four really reliable managers to support and obviously achieve the goals of the South African Board for Sheriffs. I'm going to hand you over to Mrs. Jody van Beek, who will do the opening and welcome. Thank you, Mrs. van Beek.
Thank you, Mr. Murugan. Good morning and welcome to all of those who are in attendance this morning. I thought we were going to wait a few more minutes to allow for additional participants, but I see everyone is ready to go. So good morning and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to come online with us today and to share in this session. So you would recall that on the 5th of February, we as the South African Board for Sheriffs invited the NABC to attend one of our webinars along with a number of our stakeholders. And for that particular session, we requested that particular stakeholders from our environment present their organizations to our platforms for the sheriffs. And despite the fact that there were a number of matters that were discussed, the aim was to actually have common ground between the parties in terms of what we could agree and how we could move forward. And there was a need identified to have further engagements with the NABC. So what we then did was we approached the NABC and we asked them if they'd be keen to have a further engagement, to which they've agreed. And hence our discussions planned for today has been set up. We are happy then to partner with the NABC today, and even happier that we have the various bargaining councils with us present. The list of stakeholders that are joining us today include obviously the NABC, the South African Board for Sheriffs, the Department of Justice, the Small Claims Court, SAS and SANAPS, and then there are a number of other individuals who are also part of the talk. So without any further ado, I wish to welcome you. You've already met our moderator, Mr. Murugan. He will be part of today's session, moderating. He is the Sheriff for Durban North, and he will introduce all the panel members as we go along. Once again, thank you for attending today's session. It is an information sharing session, and as you've heard, you are free and welcome to ask questions as we go along. Please post them, and Mr. Murugan will take the time to look at them and to pose them to the panel. So without any further ado, again, thank you for attending today's session, and I will hand you back to Mr. Murugan, our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. van Beek. Thank you very much for that introduction. Colleagues, our first speaker for today, before I introduce her, I would like, as our Mr. Parag has informed us, please mute, keep you on mute. If you have questions, please post them on the chat line, and we'll try our very best to answer as many questions as possible. The session for today is based on concerns raised by the bargaining councils, and obviously it is more information session for them to understand sheriffs and what sheriffs do and how they can get the best service from sheriffs. I'm going to hand you over to the vice chairperson of the NABC, Maggie Poo, who will obviously give us an overview of the national bargaining councils. Over to you, ma'am. Hi, is Maggie online?
Maggie's here. She's going to join now. Maggie, if you can please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
We
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can.
We see you. Please, can you drop your camera a bit down? We can only see the top part of your head. If you can just lower the camera a bit, the lid of the laptop.
Do you think I know how to do that?
But I think you're going to be sharing your presentation. Yeah, there
That's it.
Can you see me now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's it.
Good
Thank you,
morning,
ma'am.
everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maggie. We're going to do an overview of the bargaining councils and the NABC. The National Association of Bargaining Council, the whole purpose of this was to create a platform for all bargaining council to engage on labor and collective matters across the sectors, with the view of participating in activities and programs that will increase the value of rural bargaining councils in implementing labor laws. As you know, we are all accredited by the CCMA, so mostly we'll do what the CCMA is doing. Our national chairperson is Mrs. Shalane Audit. I'm the deputy chairperson, and our treasurer is Mr. Wandile Mkopozi. We have 48 bargaining councils in South Africa, and would have liked all bargaining councils to belong to the NABC. At the present moment, we have 15 bargaining councils that are members to the NABC. Amanzi, Bargaining Council for Civil Engineering, food retail restaurant that is in Pretoria, Bargaining Council for Meat and Trade, Bargaining Council for the Restaurant Catering Allied, which is ours, Clothing Industry Bargaining Council, General Public Service Sector Bargaining Council, which is assisting us with all these meetings, the National Bargaining Council for Hairdressing and Cosmetology, the Furniture Bargaining Council, the Motor Industry, the National Bargaining Council for Chemical Industry, Bargaining Council for Leather Industry, the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council, the National Bargaining Council for Sugar, and Transnet. These are members. And what are our powers as the National Association of Bargaining Council? We have the powers of training, we do legal advice, secretarial and administrative services. We establish panels to provide for conciliation. Panelists are those people who will sit and preside over cases in case of disputes that are referred to bargaining councils, and do exemption services voluntarily or use members of the bargaining council. We act as a professional body for dispute resolution when the industry, for instance, you'll have an industry that is involved in a strike or whatever. So the bargaining council will be involved in such a thing. We appoint an executive committee and subcommittees when necessary. And we delegate all the functions to the executive, to the powers of the executive committee, I'm sorry. We consider matters of common interest between members. We do have, bargaining councils are different, but we do have common interest. And we'll make representation to the relevant ministers, to the NETLEC, concerning legislation or proposed legislation that may affect bargaining councils. We exercise any other power that may be necessary or desirable to achieve the objective and facilitate the administration of the NABC. And we can sue, and we can be sued in our own name. And what is our vision as the NABC? Our vision is uniting bargaining councils. It is very important for all bargaining councils to speak in one word. If we speak to the minister, whoever, not like, which, you know, the more, if all of us are together, then it's easier for whoever to listen to us. Our mission is to enhance bargaining councils by ensuring stakeholders' presence and excellent service offerings through broad engagement and collaboration. What have we achieved as an organization? We've improved relations with the services sector and other strategic partners. We're marketing of the organization through exhibitions. If there's something, maybe there's a service sector AGM, we'll go there and exhibit so that people should know about bargaining councils. And we have a quarterly distribution newsletter that we send to all bargaining council and our stakeholders. And we've fostered relations with Industrial Relations Association of South Africa, which is IRASA, and an International Labor and Employment Relations Association called ILERA. We've successfully hosted various breakfast seminars on topical labor matters. We train our members. We have received a discretionary grant from services sector to ensure that our members are getting more educated on labor issues. And what are the benefits of becoming a member of the NAC as a bargaining council? We research. There are researches that were conducted by the NABC. We have training programs. We do industry trend analysis. We have quarterly newsletters. We have annual seminars and news flashes regarding labor matters. And then, like I've said before, we have 48 bargaining councils in South Africa that are to ensure workplace labor relations are regulated through collective agreements. And we're using the Labor Relations Act. There's no other, that's our Bible. The Section 27 of the Labor Relations Act allows for bargaining councils to be formed. So any industry, employer organization in that particular industry and trade union in that particular industry, one or more of that, they can form a bargaining council. Parties to the bargaining council are trade unions and employer organizations. And what is our role as a bargaining council? We are governed by Section 28 of the Labor Relations Act that entails the creation and enforcement of collective agreements. We have a collective agreement, then we must ensure that it is enforced. And we try to prevent labor bargaining councils that will try and prevent and resolve labor disputes in that particular industry. And we're also there to serve and create and manage funds of schemes. Some bargaining council have got funds, maybe sick funds, provident funds, funeral funds. Bargaining councils do that, they do manage that. And the bargaining council consists of representatives from various parties, from employers and trade unions, like I said before. And the bargaining councils, they play a very important role in dispute settlement in that particular sector. And disputes are referred to bargaining council by parties, and we have panelists, conciliators and arbitrators who are appointed to help the parties to negotiate and reach a compromise or a settlement. And then collective bargaining councils, they negotiate collectively, for that particular industry. And after that, then there will be an agreement, which is called a collective agreement. And that agreement will stipulate on issues such as minimum wage, all conditions of employment, opposed to the basic condition of employment, not necessarily opposed, but this one is a negotiated one by both parties. Things like your sick leave and other conditions of employment relating to employees. And the responsibilities of the bargaining council is, I've spoken about collective agreement, and they need to be enforced, especially in those private bargaining councils where the agreements are extended by the minister. like ours. We are a private bargaining council, so some parties are not parties to the council, but it's enforced, so they are forced to become members. And then our responsibility as bargaining council is to promotion and establishment of training and education schemes, administration of pension and provident funds, medical aid, and other similar schemes. Bargaining councils will also develop proposals for submission to NETLEC in any other appropriate forum or policy on legislation. To confer workplace forums additional matters for consultation, to provide industrial support services within the sector. The purpose of bargaining councils is to effect, we promote social justice and labor peace in the workplace. We assist a lot the CCMA, because if all sectors were to go to the CCMA, we don't think that the CCMA will manage. Hence, we have bargaining council, which are decreasing the amount of dispute that will normally go to the CCMA. And when it comes to dispute resolution, the bargaining councils are specialized in that specific industry, and trade unions, employers receive expert advice and assistance and training from bargaining councils. As the NABC, we're privileged to be engaged with the SABFS, the Board of Sheriffs, and we thank you for facilitating the session for today. We look forward to fruitful engagements for today's session, and I thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairperson, for this very inspiring talk. Learned a lot already about the bargaining councils and how they operate. We're hoping to have more engagement with you in the near future. Colleagues, as we go along, I've been tasked by the board, chairperson of the board, to give a brief overview of the South African Board for Sheriffs and the role it plays in the sheriff's profession and the relationship between the South African Board for Sheriffs, the sheriff's profession, and the Department of Justice. Before I go into the overview, I want to acknowledge Ms. Ashika Singh, my fellow Board for Sheriffs member and Director of Regional Office, Department of Justice, Western Cape Division. The Executive Manager of the South African Board for Sheriffs, Mrs. Van Beek, and her team, Training Division, and whoever else staff is present on this Zoom meeting today. The Chairperson and Vice Chairperson of the National Association of Bargaining Councils, members of the various bargaining councils, Mr. Clive 14, Director of the Small Claims Court, Mrs. Petra Root, President of STAS and executive members, Mrs. June Thomas, Chairperson of SABFS, and her executive members. Sheriffs present today, good morning and welcome, colleagues. As I stated earlier on, colleagues, it is unfortunate that we can't see everybody on screen, but I'm hoping that the organizations are well represented, and obviously we all will be able to participate and assist each other in achieving the goal we want to achieve today. As Mrs. Van Beek pointed out earlier on, the aim of this information session was for the bargaining council to understand the sheriff's profession better, and obviously for the sheriff's profession to understand the bargaining councils, their needs and their concerns, and obviously share ideas as to how we can work better in terms of improving service delivery in both areas. As I said, on behalf of the chairperson of the South African Board for Sheriffs, I welcome you all. Colleagues, a very brief overview of the South African Board for Sheriffs. It must be firstly noted that the South African Board for Sheriffs is the regulator appointed by the Minister of Justice in terms of the Sheriffs Act 90 of 1986. The board is established by the minister, as I said, and once the minister has appointed 11 members to this board, persons from various sectors of the professional arena, he obviously appoints 5 sheriffs from 5 different provinces to sit on this board, together with persons from the accounting field, the human resources field, and obviously someone from the Department of Justice to represent him so that he understands the daily running of this board. Once the board is established, as I said, 11 members come together, and the Sheriffs Act requires various committees to be established so that the objects and role of the board is achieved. The the objects of the board and role of the board is firstly is dictated in terms of Section 8 of the Sheriffs Act. Section 8A demands that the board requires that the board would obviously provide training and provide tools in terms of training and development and skills development so that sheriffs are able to carry out their duties professionally. B demands that the South African Board for Sheriffs would establish a fidelity fund and obviously administer the fund for the benefit of the public. As you know, the sheriffs deal with public funds on a daily basis, so the board is responsible to ensure that these funds are protected and the fund is there to protect the public in terms of maladministration by sheriffs. Section 8C requires the board to develop guidelines in order to properly administer deputy sheriff's role in the sheriff's profession. As you know, that sheriffs are appointed in terms of the Sheriffs Act, and they are responsible to appoint deputy sheriffs to carry out the functions of serving and executing processes on the road. As I said, the board would set up different committees to assist it in effectively achieving its mandate in terms of the Sheriffs Act. And one very key committee that the board would set up is the Legal and Complaints Committee. The Legal and Complaints Committee is established with a manager who would attend to the daily requirements of this department, especially in terms of complaints received from the public. And obviously, it is obviously mandated to attend to the disciplinary process or inquiries or investigations against sheriffs and inform the board of its findings if there is any reason to remove a sheriff or to suspend or carry out an in-depth inquiry into the sheriff's dealings. This committee is responsible to assess complaints before referring matters to the board or to the Minister for Removal. The Legal and Complaints Committee would also carry out regular inspections on sheriff's trust accounts to ensure that there is no maladministration, and obviously advise the sheriffs of best practice in terms of bookkeeping and accounting process and procedures. The board further, as I mentioned, in terms of Section 8B, is required to establish a fidelity fund. The Legal and Complaints Division is also mandated and tasked to ensure that this fund is protected and obviously investigate any fraud or corruption against the fund. The Legal and Complaints Department is managed by a very capable attorney who ensures that the board, when carrying out investigations or carrying out disciplinary processes, is fair to both parties or all parties. Section 8A, in regards to training and skills development, we have a very capable training and skills development department headed by Mr. Nell, who's present here today. This training and skills development department looks towards the sheriff's profession and stakeholders like the NABC to establish proper training schedules or proper training material so that sheriffs receive the best training. We are informed by complaints received by the legal committee on training initiatives as well. The training and development program runs throughout the year, where we have our general training, which is called the needs-based training, where we look at various problem areas that sheriffs experience on the ground on a daily basis and put together training. In terms of appointment of sheriffs, the training and skills development division attends to the training of all new sheriffs that the minister appoints. So immediately a sheriff is appointed, he would go on a 3-week in-class training session, and obviously will have to pass a test in terms of the sheriff's introductory course, which is a registered training course carried out by the Justice College and obviously under the SASITA service heater, security and service heater. The financial affairs of the board is managed by a finance manager, and obviously the executive manager is responsible to ensure that the financial affairs of the board is properly accounted for. This accounting is done on an annual basis to the minister, wherein the chairperson of the board will present the annual report to the minister and obviously highlight to him the operations throughout the year, the finances coming in and going out of this board, and also money spent in terms of ensuring that the mandate of the board is achieved in terms of regulating the shares profession. As I mentioned earlier on, the minister appoints an official from his department to sit on this board so as to keep in touch with the daily affairs of the board. And that person is none other than Mrs. Ashika Singh, who's present here today, who attends all board meetings and obviously participate at committee levels so that she understands the daily operation of the board. Colleagues, that's a basic overview of the role of the Sheriff's South African Board for Sheriffs in relation to the sheriff's profession. Few other aspects that the board has put in place that so as to ensure that we are effective on the ground is we have a hotline wherein members of the public can send concerns via this hotline to the board so that the board can understand people's complaints. As you know, people sometimes do not want to be known, want to be remain anonymous. So this hotline managed by an outside service provider would obviously assist the board in ensuring that our mandate is achieved in terms of ensuring service delivery is achieved to the in the most professional manner by the South African Board for Sheriffs and sheriff's profession at large. We have a very strong relationship with the sheriffs on the ground via the two associations, the SABFS and SABFS. We have established a special committee which is called the Consultative Forum, wherein the board meets with these two professional associations in order to establish concerns, problem areas, and obviously to ensure that we all speak in one voice as a role player in the civil justice system. Therefore, you would find that SABFS and SABFS is represented here today together with a number of sheriffs that they brought on board to understand the concerns by the National Bargaining Council. With that, I want to move on to the program and thank you very much. If there's any questions, you're most welcome to raise it now before we move further. Anything Bargaining Council wants to clarify? Nothing, all right. We'll move on to court services. As I said, Ms. Ashika Singh, a member of the South African Board for Sheriffs, is representing the Department of Justice under court services. Ms. Singh will do a presentation on the role of the Department of Justice court services. Over to you, Mrs. Singh.
Thank you, Ellen. Good morning. I'd like to wish a very good morning to my colleagues from the South African Board for Sheriffs, Mr. Morrigan, from the NABC, Ms. Maggie Pui, from the Executive Manager of the South African Board of Sheriffs, Jody van Wyk, my fellow speakers and presenters, Mr. Clive Fortuin and Mr. Andy Adimulim. As a Department of Justice, we are delighted to be part of this meeting, and we thank the National Association of Bargaining Councils for having invited us today. As Mr. Morrigan has alluded to, the sheriff's profession is a separate legal entity from the Department of Justice, but works very closely with our department. As such, the Department of Justice, and in particular at a local level, we consider a sheriff to be an officer of the court. The appointment of sheriffs is for a specific jurisdiction. For example, we'll have a sheriff of a lower court or a sheriff of a higher court or a sheriff of a combined lower and higher court. And this denotes what their area of practice will entail and the scope of their work. Now, many sheriffs, as I've seen from the letter from Mr. Parag, are very comfortable in the role of sheriffs for the court, having received training in this respect. What we're going to speak about today would be specific aspects that were of concern to both the sheriffs as well as the Department of Justice, and that entails strategic engagements, community outreach and communications, alignment of jurisdictions and vacancies, tariffs, fees and invoices, training and information technology systems, service of process by maintenance investigators, stakeholders liaison fora, and our justice relationship with the sheriff's profession. There were other aspects that we were invited to discuss, but we've realized they have little or no relevance to the Department of Justice. Next slide, Vincent. Now, the department works very closely with sheriff as a collaboration to ensure that our key focal area, our mandate, is service delivery to the public. So what we realize that sheriffs need to understand the strategy of the department insofar as it affects their work. As a Department of Justice, we have an annual performance plan, and which makes provision for improving services to the vulnerable groups through payment of maintenance money. Our key performance area requires that courts finalize and issue maintenance orders within 90 days from the time the sheriff has served the respondent. Now, you must realize in certain provinces, this maintenance is the primary source of income. Now, for the sheriff, he has to submit this return to the court as soon as possible and without undue delay, so that this 90-day turnaround for our department to be effective is realized. And failure to achieve this target may lead to us having an audit qualification. Next slide, Vincent. Okay, we move on to community outreach and communications. Now, historically, there has been a negative public perception of sheriffs, and this is largely based on distrust. Sheriffs serve a critical function in society by serving court processes, and this negative perception is seen through our sheriffs serving or at processes that may attach items or evicting people, etc. So there needs to be a change of public perceptions about the role of the sheriff, especially in effecting evictions and repossessions of items, as well as in selling of immovable and movable property. Now, in the past, we've had sheriffs taking part in public outreach programs with the department, and in the Western Cape, where I'm from, it still continues with many of our sheriffs taking part in different activities that the Department of Justice has. But with COVID and with the change of times, sheriffs must continue on their own through the board to use other media and platforms to educate the public about their service and fees, such as radio, TV adverts, programs, social media platforms. Sheriffs are also encouraged to work with the police to accompany them to serve in hostile areas to avoid delays. Now, we've noted this does not happen in many areas, and we note that there is sometimes a return of non-service because of no protection being effected to the sheriff who was in such an area. We move on to the alignment of jurisdictions and vacancies. Next slide, Vincent. There has been a program in the Department of Justice where we are realigning all of the magisterial districts and our courts in line with the jurisdictions. So our Deputy Minister and the DDG Court Services have been leading this process to align our sheriff's jurisdictions, which is our court jurisdictions per se, as part of the rationalization project. Most regions have completed the work, save for a few where we are grappling with some challenges, but we have, especially in the Eastern Cape, done extensive work, and there are negotiations happening with sheriffs as well as other stakeholders to ensure that this process is realized in the new financial year. Rationalization is an ongoing process that must also respond to civil needs and changes amongst communities, especially in our rapidly expanding urban areas. Now, consideration was given to our smaller and less lucrative jurisdictions of sheriffs, and some areas have now been combined to make sheriffs' work more viable. Like we had, for instance, one of our courts that we had advertised recently, and it was totally unviable because the turnover was not something that a sheriff could run an office through. So it's now common practice to appoint one sheriff for both high and lower courts to achieve sustainable economic goals for the profession. Now, the process to fill the vacancies, which we have advertised in November last year, is underway and will be finalized by the end of this financial year. I'm currently in the process of collating responses from the provincial advisory committees of each region. I'm awaiting responses from 2 regions, and I will shortly prepare that memorandum to the minister to ensure that these vacancies are filled. So it would take place perhaps before the close of this financial year. Next slide, Vincent. We move on to an aspect that has been a concern by the sheriff's profession with respect to payment of their fees as well as invoices by our courts. To alleviate this, there has been training of clerks through Justice College so that there is a better understanding of how tariffs work in taxations. Now, sheriffs are sometimes disadvantaged when a bill is taxed in a court, be it the High Court or the Magistrates Court, and because there is sometimes a lack of understanding of how this particular tariff works. The board is welcome to assign an experienced sheriff to take part in this training within the Justice College as part of the collaboration with the department and the sheriffs. As a department, we must also comply with the Treasury regulations to pay suppliers within 30 days, as an age analysis is done to track compliance. This is also part of our annual performance plan as the Department of Justice. For this to become effective, sheriffs need to have a valid tax clearance certificate for the year and for them to do effective bookkeeping so that it will not we won't have double billing by the sheriff, and this will facilitate proper payments by that court manager. I recently had to chair a mediation between a court manager and a sheriff where the sheriff did not have a valid tax clearance certificate, but refused to effect further services when no payment was effected. There must be compliance of this valid tax clearance certificate because we as a Department of Justice can only pay a sheriff on the presentation of a valid tax clearance certificate for the year. So if there are any non-payments or late payments, they must be taken up by the court with the court manager or escalated to the Director Court Operations and Facilities or the regional head of that particular region. If you do not receive any joy in that respect, you can escalate that to myself and I will take it up with that particular regional head. Next slide, Vincent. We move on to training and information technology systems. As a Department of Justice, we are committed to the ongoing training of our clerks of court. We have, through our Justice College, a training module for our clerk of court civil, and there are 2 modules on taxation. the basic module, which every clerk does, and the advanced module where a specific clerk who's training to become a taxing master does. So we're currently putting through our IT branch an infrastructure to offer such training online, but it's still work in progress. The department has made IT one of our strategic goals, and it's in our APP in order to operate in the fourth industrial revolution. So the capacity of our video conference centers across the country are being upgraded and improved to facilitate learning and communication. We are procuring new laptops and desktops, and this is an ongoing process which will in fact stem into the new financial year as well as new PBX systems are being rolled out with infrastructure like Wi-Fi as opposed to having network points. And we will also request that the Justice College to prioritize the taxation model training in the new financial year so that we have effective bills, taxation of bills. Next slide, Vincent. So we move on to the process service by the maintenance investigators. Now, as we are all aware, colleagues, the sheriff serves all of our court processes. The only exception to this is the maintenance case, which is found in the Maintenance Act, and it gives us the maintenance investigator who can serve these processes in order to relieve the financial burden on the applicants. Now, the rationale behind this is that there are so many vulnerable people who are applying for maintenance. There are women who are single parents, caregivers who do not have the means to pay a sheriff. So that is why the Act took cognizance of that. And in this respect, we urge sheriffs who are in a better financial position to consider rendering some pro bono service of these maintenance processes for these indigent applicants. In addition to this, and as part of the National Strategic Plan for Gender-Based Violence, which our state president has rolled out, we also urge the sheriffs to participate in this and assist with the free service of domestic violence applications on the respondent. So this will help with this fighting of the scourge of gender-based violence. Next slide, Vincent. So with the sheriffs, there are a number of stakeholders, liaison fora, to interface with the different levels of justice stakeholders at case flow management level, as well as provincial management levels as well. So at operational level, which is at our court, a local court level, be it a district court or a regional court, sheriffs are encouraged to take part in the case flow management meeting. Now, this case flow management meeting is extremely important because it deals with the inner workings of that particular court, which the sheriff is part of that jurisdiction. It's called the District Efficiency Enhancement Committee, and it's led by the Chief Magistrate of that cluster. The second forum, which is the Regional Court Forum, is the Regional Efficiency Enhancement Committee, and that's led by the Regional Court President. The difference between both of these magistrate courts are the quantum. So specific quantum will be for the district court and a higher quantum will be for the regional court, and different cases in that respect. And lastly, we have the Provincial Efficiency Enhancement Committee led by the Judge President of each province, and that deals with all of the matters provincially, and that would naturally be your representatives of the two sheriffs associations, which will take part in this particular provincial Enhancement Efficiency Committee. Now, at regional office level, sheriff's representatives are welcome and encouraged to liaise with the regional head to set up meetings to deal with their complaints if it is not taken up by our director, court operations and facilities. Now, all of these different fora provide for avenues at different points to raise your issues. And if you are unsuccessful at these different levels, then you raise it with myself as the ministerial representative for the Sheriff's Board. Next slide, Vincent. This is in addition to our regular presentation, and that's the Sheriff's justice relationship with the Sheriff's profession. Now, at national level, there is a twofold relationship that the department shares with the South African Board for Sheriffs. Firstly, there's representation on the board through a ministerial representative, and the current incumbent is myself. We deal with an oversight role with the operational aspects of the sheriff's profession, and we have an oversight of their regulatory aspects where this can be assisted. Our second role is actually more on a ministerial level, which is the administration of the sheriff's profession. This deals largely with the appointment, suspension, and removal of both permanent and acting sheriffs. We deal with the amendment of the sheriff's tariff, which is regulated for both our high and magistrates court. And we have an oversight role of legislation that is going to be amended and promulgated. Colleagues, that concludes my presentation for today. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Singh. Thank you very much for that inspiring talk. And we will now open up before we move further for any questions from any participant that wants to raise with Ms. Singh before she leaves.
Sorry, Alan, may I continue and ask a couple of questions, if I may?
You may. Who am I speaking? Please introduce yourself.
It's Jacques Tarika. I'm an attorney, and I'm here at the invitation of SANAPS. Okay.
Most welcome, Jacques.
Thank you. Ms. Singh, sorry, there's a couple of issues with regard to liaison in particular. I know in the Johannesburg and Randburg area, the liaison is hi. Sorry, there's quite a strong liaison in this area, for example, in Johannesburg in particular and Randburg. But there are some areas where it's just totally non-existent. Is there any way that the department, first of all, can try and promote these things? Because, I mean, just to give you an example, the East Rand is particularly weak in having setups of these kind of liaison committees. And in fact, we had an inquiry from the Germiston area, from the magistrates there, whether they could actually sort of join the Joburg cluster kind of liaison that's quite regular here. So that's the one question. The other thing was with regard to taxation. Taxation has always been a problem with the sheriffs, and it's been made even worse. I can't remember the exact rule, but you've got to now tax in the area on which the process was issued, even though you have, as a sheriff, executed thousands of kilometers away. I mean, that kills a lot of the practicality. Perhaps your idea of promoting the IT, let's say, presence in the courts, that might possibly assist in not changing the rule. In other words, allow the sheriff to do representations virtually. Yeah, I think that's for the moment. That's my two questions. Thanks, Ashika.
Thanks, Jacques. Okay, with respect to your first question, with every sheriff who is appointed for a particular area or jurisdiction is fully conversant with the head of court. And these case flow management meetings are dealt with on a monthly basis with the head of court of that particular area. So that's at a very intrinsically local level. Now, with respect to the provincial structures, which is the PEC, that is on invitation by the judge president. So what I can do in that respect is to perhaps through our two associations obtain their representatives for the profession and send those names to the secretary of the judge president. So when these meetings are being held, then we can in fact have an invitation being accorded to said representative, and they can have a meaningful engagement for concerns they may have in this respect. With respect to your next question pertaining to the problem for taxation of services being issued, services being executed outside the area of execution, my understanding is that there will be a move in the future, Mr. Tarika, for an amendment that will make provision for effective service by email. I do realize that service in this respect is already taking place in the High Court, and that is accepted. So I'm confident that with the fourth industrial revolution, this will come to pass as well for the both arms of the magistrates court, being the district and the regional court. I trust that answers your question.
Yes, thanks, Ashika.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Thank you, Mr. Tarika. Colleagues, if you could please do me a favor and post your questions on the chat line so that we can get more airtime here. Ms. Singh, I have two further questions for you, posed by Mr. Enric. He says he does send his invoices timeously to the court, but the reply you receive is that the BAS system is not working since November 2020. That is why the account is not paid. What is the way forward here, and how long should the sheriff wait to receive payment from the court? Is there no alternative method to ensure timely payments to the sheriff? I'm going to read the next one as well so that you can answer both at the same time.
Can I answer that one first,
All right.
before I
yes, sure.
move on
Sure,
to the
go
next
ahead.
point? I think I give Mr. Hendrick a good response.
Yeah.
With the BAS system, there may be certain technical challenges that specific courts have. If this payment has not been effected for a long time, and here, this must be escalated to the office of the regional head of the province that Mr. Hendrick comes from, as well as the director of finance of the region, so that this can be escalated and his payment fast-tracked, because the Department of Justice has a policy of 30-day turnaround for payment of services. And we used to file courts, but if this is not the case, please bring this to the attention of the regional head of your province and the director of finance, so that they can fast-track these payments for you.
Thank you, Ms. Singh.
Question, Mr. Murugan?
Okay, Mr. M.K. Naidu says that in the Val Gauteng, he does not get invited to the meetings. I'm presuming the case flow management meetings. Most probably you can assist him in this regard, ma'am.
Okay. With respect to the, I'm not sure if he means the case flow management meetings, because that's on a local level, and that's a local court aspect where we have a member of the attorney's profession, and we have our local legal aid board, different stakeholders of the JSPS cluster, and court officials that are present. Members of the bar are generally not invited because they are not initial role players to a case flow management meeting. But if at the instance of Mr. Naidu, if he is working closely in that area as an advocate and would like to participate in that, the said chief magistrate can be contacted and his name given to the secretary of the chief magistrate, who can include him in further meetings in this respect. The same goes for the Regional Efficiency Enhancement Committee. With respect to the PEC meeting, the PEC meeting is very particular. The PEC meeting does not just have any member of the bar. The Legal Practice Council has to determine who is their elected representative who will go to the Judge President's meeting. So if you'd like to confer with your local Legal Practice Council and ascertain who is your local representative for the Provincial Efficiency Enhancement Committee. And if you have concerns pertaining to that particular province, you can make that known to said representative and they will put forward your concerns to the Judge President.
Ms. Singh, Mr. Naidu is a sheriff and is referring to the case flow management meetings. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. So yes, he can attend the case flow management meetings by indicating that to the chief magistrate's secretary, and they will invite him for the, in fact, even advise the court manager of that local court, and they can in fact advise him when the next meeting is going to take place, so he can in fact attend that. It's a regular meeting, so I'm sure he will add value to that.
Okay, I have one more question for you. Mr. Otto, also a sheriff. We have a lot of problems with the magistrates court taxation. One attorney asks for the start for the taxation, at the start of the taxation of my costs. If I ask for payment without reason, how can we address this? I'm not understanding the question. We have a problem with the magistrates court taxations. An attorney asks from the start for the taxation of my costs if I ask for payment without reason. In other words, immediately he gives his bill, the attorney wants to tax his bill. He wants to know how can he address this.
Okay, now this obviously is a personal contract between him and the attorney who he is contracted to. This is something that falls within the Legal Practice Council and not the Department of Justice per se, because we are the venue for attorneys. So Mr. Otto is actually contracted with the attorney to provide the attorney a service. And perhaps there can be discussions with the local Legal Practice Council of the particular area. But I do believe that there should be effective payment by the attorney on presentation of such bill. Sometimes attorneys do wait for a bill to be taxed because there is parties on the other side who may be liable for the costs and not their client. So they must confirm with the attorney of record to ascertain if this is a matter that is litigated and there has been a trial that has been proceeded, and if such adverse cost order is made on the opposing party, then that party will be liable for said costs, and therefore it may come to pass that the attorney's client may not naturally be responsible for the payment of this bill. But I think there must be proper communication between the attorney and the sheriffs, and we would request that perhaps some of these concerns be raised with the Legal Practice Council, who actually deals with the oversight of attorneys and advocates, so there can be a better working relationship. But I will take this question on and I will send it to the Legal Practice Council. Thank you, Mr. Otto.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, Ms. Singh, for your responses. I am now going to move on with the program. Thank you, Ms. Singh, for the presentation, and thank you for assisting us understand the role and obviously the active role that the Department of Justice via you and the Deputy Minister plays in the sheriff's profession. I've got one more question that I want to ask you before you leave. It seems like an important one. Ms. Singh, can you please have some clarity on the issue of the Government Gazette printing of adverts for fixed property sales and execution? I'm going to take this last question for you before you go. It is a current problem that that sheriffs face. Just to give you a background, currently the Government Gazette printers are not printing the sales and execution adverts due to some technical problems. Is there any way you can assist us?
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, as a Department of Justice, we're not particularly involved in this particular aspect, but if a formal request can be made with us, then we can send that to our national component who deals with the Government Gazette, and they can make some kind of representation in this respect. If you can please send that as a formal request to us to intercede on your behalf, and we will attend to looking at that for you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll get to Mrs. June Thomas from SABFS, chairperson of SABFS, to respond or forward a complaint or query to you. Thank you very much, Ms. Singh. I'm now going to call upon, thank you. I'm going to call upon Mr. Fortune, Clive Fortune, the Director of the Small Claims Court. Mr. Fortune presented to us in the last master class on the 5th of March, and the National Bargaining Council felt the presentation is valuable, and they wanted to listen and understand the role the Small Claims Court plays and the relationship it has with the sheriffs, so that they can take important key aspects from this presentation and try and see how it can assist their department. Mr. Fortune, over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Let me just get this right. I would like to thank the NABC for this opportunity to share information about the Small Claims Court. The Small Claims Court came about due to Act 61 of 1984, and at that stage the limit of claims was set at 1,000 Rand. On the 1st of April 2019, that amount has increased to 20,000 Rand. So over the years there has been an increase in the monetary jurisdiction of the Small Claims Court. The jurisdiction of the Small Claims Court can either be where the cause of action arose or where the defendant lives or works. Now, at the Small Claims Court, it is up to the clerk of the Small Claims Court to then advise the claimants or the applicants the best route to go. Because if you have, for instance, the cause of action is in Bellville, the defendant resides in Mitchell's Plain. It's a different jurisdiction, so it makes it a bit difficult. So the clerk would then advise the complainant to go to Mitchell's Plain, because it would be easier for the sheriff to serve summons in the area where the person, the defendant, resides. Now, the Small Claims Court has been in operation since 1985. In order for Small Claims Court to operate, it has to be promulgated by the minister. Currently, the Small Claims Court falls under the ambit of the Deputy Minister, and every Small Claims Court has an advisory board. The advisory board would normally consist of the senior magistrate at the specific court, the court manager, and one of the commissioners. The advisory board will meet once every 3 months or when a meeting is required. Now, in the last year and a half, COVID has had a very negative impact on face-to-face meetings for that matter. Now, before instituting any sort of action, the complainant needs to determine whether it's viable to institute action, seeing that if the defendant is unemployed, it's going to be a complete waste of costs to institute action as such. Now, the clerk of the Small Claims Court needs to determine the appearances, and by determining the appearances, it has an impact on the number of work that is given to the sheriff as such. So normally what we would do is we would allow 1 calendar month from the date the summons is issued. But before the summons is issued, there's a letter of demand, which doesn't need a court stamp. The letter of demand can be downloaded from the internet or collected by the complainant. The letter of demand is filled in. What we normally request from the complainant is to either by registered post, send the letter of demand to the complainant, or deliver it and get the defendant to sign, or go to the police station and make an affidavit stating that the letter of demand has been delivered. The letter of demand can contain 1 paragraph stating that I'm claiming the sum of 10,000 Rand for money's lent or whatever the case may be. If the claim is more than 20,000 Rand, say it's 25,000 Rand, the complainant can say, look, I'm going to forego the 5,000 Rand and I'm only claim the limit, which is 20,000 Rand. And then after 14 days, the complainant goes back. If there is no reaction from the complainant, from the defendant, the complainant goes to the court and says, look, I want to issue summons. The clerk will complete the summons after perusing all the documentation to find out whether the time frame has been adhered to, and then send the complainant to the sheriff. And the clerks will inform the complainant that payment of the sheriff is the complainant's responsibility. One of the problems naturally is that if the complainant doesn't have the funds to pay the sheriff on that specific day, it might delay the serving of the process, but the complainants are advised to immediately, within the next 2 or 3 days, get to the sheriff. The court rolls, very low number of cases on the court rolls because we do not have that large number of commissioners. The commissioner sitting at the Small Claims Court is doing it pro bono. At Cape Town, we have about 5 or 6 commissioners. At Bellville, we have in the region of about 10 commissioners. So it depends on the court itself, the number of commissioners that avail themselves. We have requested via the advisory board for more and more attorneys that qualify to become commissioners for that matter. And the program for the sitting of the Small Claims Court is drawn up 6 months in advance. And that is drawn up in consultation with the advisory board. Now, when it comes to return of services from the sheriff, we say any amendments made emanates from the court, and revised documentation is then handed to the applicants to hand over to the sheriff. If any changes are made before it has been served, the court clerk will have to initial it. If the return of service is not available on the court date, the matter will be postponed or struck off roll. It might happen that the matter is struck off roll because the return of service have not been handed in by the complainant. In the small claims, in most cases, you find that the return of service is handed to the complainant itself and not returned to the court as with other civil matters. Therefore, in some areas, plaintiffs are also requested to collect the return of services, while in others it is delivered to the court as part of the normal process. And this is prescribed by the, this is guided by the prescribed codes. I think one of the very important aspects is meetings. Mr. Singh has alluded to the regional court efficiency and the district court efficiency meetings, as well as the case flow meetings. The meetings with the small claim staff and the sheriff are not happening. Meetings with the advisory board and the sheriffs are not happening, and we would like to then extend an invitation for the sheriff to become part of these meetings. On the other hand, the sheriff is reluctant to do arrests for deferred fines because there's an argument it's a criminal matter and SABFS must do those type of arrests. And this leads to the sheriff basically losing income. So there's different courts using the sheriff for different things. So Mr. Singh has alluded to this participation at the case law meeting because it will open up a channel of communication between the sheriff and the court staff in general. There has been a question about payment. We have the PFMA that guides us in terms of payments, 30-day payments. If a payment is not made within 30 days, then we are obliged to provide reasons why payment could not take place for that matter. That is my presentation. Is there any questions?
Colleagues, are there any questions for Mr. Fortin? I don't see any on the chat line. Bargaining Council. Mr. Fortin, I don't see any questions for you. I want to thank you for participating. If I pick up questions later on in the program, I will direct them if it's still online. Thank you very much for your participation and your presentation once again, for so willingly partnering with the South African Board for Shares. We are hoping that this relationship could further enhance so that service delivery to your courts is improved, and obviously you achieve your goals you want to achieve. Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marigan and other panelists. Thank you.
Colleagues, we're now going to move on in the program. I want to just urge members present here to please, if there's any questions you want to raise, please raise it as early as possible so that it is asked in time to the relevant presenter. And obviously, please place your voice, please mute your computers so that we only the presenters is allowed to speak online. Questions will be taken on the chat room. Thank you. I'm now going to hand you over to Mr. Andy Adimulum, who is a sheriff of Johannesburg West jurisdiction. He's also a senior facilitator and assessor for the South African Board for Sheriffs, who was very instrumental in assisting the South African Board for Sheriffs and the sheriff's profession at large in the training of sheriffs and deputy sheriffs and administrative staff. He's also one of the key persons who assists the South African Board for Sheriffs in developing the various training material for the South African Board for Sheriffs and the sheriff's profession. Mr. Adimulum will go through the process and procedures followed by the sheriffs in terms of executing the enforcement awards on behalf of the Bargaining Council and the CCMA. I'm now going to hand you over to Mr. Adimulum for a detailed presentation on the execution procedure in terms of the magistrate's court. Thank you, Mr. Adimulum.
Andy, are you there? Good morning, everyone. I see you left the best for the last, and I think the meeting is only concluded after I stop speaking. So I'm just going to share my screen.
Umang, please make, or Shana, please make Mr. Adimulum a co-host so that he can share the screen.
He can go ahead and share. We've given him rights.
Can you see it now?
We cannot. You had it on just 90, right? We're on now.
Right. Okay, I'm going to deal with three parts of the slideshow. Firstly, the writs that come from a magistrate's court and the writs that emanate from the small claims court to the magistrate's court, but more especially the enforcement awards that we receive from the various bargaining councils. So the same rule will apply, Rule 41, in terms of the magistrate's court, the 32 of 1944. And I'll take you through the flow chart very, very quickly. It says once the attachment is made by the deputy sheriff, the return is processed and filed, and obviously evaluation is completed by the deputy. The original writ and notice of attachment must stay on file with the sheriff. Thereafter, we forward a copy and the return to the attorney. Here, it will be the applicant. Most of the times, the applicants would like to come to the sheriff's offices to fetch. And then obviously, the sheriff will then explain to them whether they require a sale date. And a sale date is only given when the value of the goods are below 5,000 or above 5,000. The affidavit is received when sheriffs attach goods and there's a claim as to the goods not being of the defendant, or it belongs to a third party, or it's on hire purchase. If the value of the goods are below 5,000, then the sheriff allocates a sale date 15 days after the date of the attachment. Obviously, it says inform attorney, but this applies to a normal applicant that comes from the bargaining council or the CCMA or from the small claims court, a writ that's issued out of the magistrate's court. We then give them a time and a place of sale. Then we inform the attorneys to forward sales notices at least 10 days before the sale to the sheriff to affix to the notice board at the court and the sheriff's office. Now, again, here where I say attorney, it'll be obviously the applicant. In most sheriff's offices, in my office, we've got a dedicated lady that assists applicants that come from the National Bargaining Council to prepare a notice of sale and thereafter send it off for a quote for advertising if it's above 5,000 Rand. Then we get the quotation. We will then call the applicant back, obviously, to explain to them this is the cost of advertising. And if it's not for advertising, the sheriff obviously will affix at his premises and at the court. If there's a sale without advertising or with advertising, you will see that the sheriff will always request an indemnity in terms of Rule 38. That is to cover the sheriff now from any damages should he remove, or if there's any damage to the stuff that is brought in the sales room or during the sale or after that. Sales that are under 5,000 Rand do not require an advert. Once the indemnity is received or the security, the removal is done, and obviously the goods are in storage. If the advert has been placed, then obviously the sheriff or the staff that's dedicated will then check if the advert is correctly printed, the time, the date, and the plaintiff, the case numbers, and the parties as well. Once the indemnity is received where the goods are over 5,000 and under 5,000, we remove and we also keep in storage until a sale date is required. Then we talk about the sales procedure. So on the day of the sale, the sheriff has to comply with Section 45 of the CPA, that's in terms of FICA, to register all buyers, obtain a copy of the ID and copy of his utility bill not less than 3 months old. The buyer is to pay a registration fee. Thereafter, he'll be given a bidder's card to buy. He will be provided with all payments. All goods will be labeled and set in goods in lots. The auction rules and obviously the conditions of sale will be read out. Thereafter, the sheriff will then prepare a vendor roll of all the sales that he's conducted. And after all the amounts has been conducted, the sheriff will there draw up a distribution and they obviously pay over all the funds to the creditors as per the writ on file. There's also a slideshow that we do for the High Court, but that is only used when if a matter is coming from the Labour Court, obviously to the High Court, then we also have a slide on that. But in terms of your movable flow chart that I explained to you, the same conditions or the same process and the procedures that applies in the Magistrates Court will apply in both the CCMA and enforcement awards that are received from the respective bargaining councils. I think, Mr. Murugan, that is the end of my presentation in terms of the flow chart.
Thank you, Mr. Adimulum. I'm just going to pose a few questions here. Okay, firstly, the member of the Bargaining Council for Chemical Industry wants to know whether the presentation can be made available to them. That can be arranged by the South African Board for Sheriffs, and we will most definitely attend to that after this workshop. I have a question here. What is the purpose of the indemnity fee? From Boleshleni. What is the purpose of the indemnity fee? Can you answer, Mr. Adimulum?
My colleague Mats Ngaba is online. He'll be able to answer that question.
Mr. Mangaba, are you available to answer this question? Mr. Adimulum, I don't think he's online. Can you please answer?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can.
Good morning, colleagues. If you can repeat the question again for me.
What is the purpose of the indemnity fee? Maybe the question is not posed correctly. What is the purpose of the indemnity fee? Can you answer?
Maybe if I can answer what is an indemnity,
Yes.
what is it to indemnify the sheriff? The first issue, I think maybe it's something else, because maybe it might be the limit of most people use to say when we indemnify you, we'll indemnify you to the amount of anything that is leveled to the writ amount. But being as it may, to indemnify the sheriff is you indemnify him against all legal proceedings or legal costs or anything that can come against the sheriff. So you say, I instruct the sheriff to execute this writ, but I take responsibility for any legal action that may come against the sheriff. So basically that is it. And the fee amount, the sheriff in most cases will say, without any threshold, unlimited indemnity, because we don't know how much are the costs that will, be at the end of the day. So it will always be according to my request as a sheriff to say, can you make your security unlimited so that I can feel free that you will cover my cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mangaba. In fact, there was a follow-up question by Monica Baselio. who wanted to know, when the sheriff requests an unlimited indemnity, is there a limit to this amount? And I assume you answered that question. Do you want to elaborate on that response, or are you comfortable?
Colleague, I am comfortable, unless if maybe, extra thing that she wants, but I mean, indemnity, as you indemnify, unlimited is only just to cover myself in terms of legal costs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mangaba. I've got another query raised. Are there instances where the indemnity fee can be waived? You'll be able to answer?
So again, they refer to the indemnity fee.
Yes, can it be waived? In other words, the indemnity, can it be waived?
Unfortunately not. Unless if maybe you can rephrase that question to say to which level is that based on.
Okay, Monica says she's happy with the response. Thank you very much. I'm not too sure who's who's representing the bargaining councils, but I have a query from Mr. Ian Burton, the Sheriff of Gauteng. I must apologize, I don't know the jurisdiction. It is very important that the NABC explain the process of execution. Interpleaders are a problem. CCMA does not facilitate interpleaders. The NABC also does not have a process in place. The magistrates court in some areas refuses to attend to interpleaders for the CCMA matters, as the matter did not originate from their court. It's something that is directed to the National Bargaining Councils. If we have somebody who can respond, if we don't, then we'll obviously take it offline with the National Bargaining Council. Just to give you a background for the understanding of the Bargaining Council, the amendments to Section 43 of the Labour Court Act, as you know, moved the entire process from the High Court to the Magistrates Court. And the difficulty sheriffs face currently is that the Magistrates Court refuses, or some of the Magistrates Courts refuses to act in terms of an enforcement award, stating that they do not have jurisdiction over Labour Court matters. So even in the case of the National Bargaining Council's enforcement awards, the sheriffs reach a stage of the execution process wherein they cannot institute interpleader proceedings if there's a third-party claim, due to the magistrates' courts not wanting to hear these matters. I have Ian Burton says the indemnity security is a requirement by the insurance covering the sheriff's profession. I guess that's just a remark as well. Monica from the Bargaining Council, our council has a problem with who is responsible for the payment of the account. The council is being charged when we are not the plaintiff. Mr. Mangaba, can you answer? Our council has a problem with who is responsible for the payment of the account. The council is being charged when we are not the plaintiff.
Okay, Monica, it depends that who gives the sheriff instructions. Like I'll take the CCMA. CCMA instructs us, but they also have a threshold of who, up to which level is the applicant responsible. So in your platform, I'm not sure whether your clients or the plaintiff is the one who's supposed to pay the sheriff, but every person in any matter who gives instruction is liable for that account. So most probably in your bargaining council, then if you don't give instructions, therefore the plaintiff will be responsible for that account. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mangaba.
Hello, Alan. Can I just add to that response?
Yes, you may.
See, Monica, in the CCMA, they usually will send us a letter. They will say that they are responsible for the payment, they'll place a tick, or client is responsible to pay. So we would like something from the bargaining councils like that. So we know who is responsible for the sheriff's charges.
Thank you, Mr. Adimolum. I don't see any further questions, but I want, if Mr. Fortin is available, Clive, if he is still online, there has been a suggestion made by Mr. Jack Cherika, wherein he states that in regards to small claims court hearings, if the commissioners can take into account or do an investigation on the financial affairs of the defendant in terms of settling the debt or the judgment, he feels that if an inquiry is done at the stage of granting judgment as to the financial affairs of the defendant, then the commissioner can determine whether the debt can be paid in installments rather than the sheriff trying to execute the warrant in terms of finding assets that obviously in most cases the sheriff cannot locate as sufficient assets to cover the debt. So the suggestion is maybe the commissioners can take into account the inquiry into the financial position of the defendant. Mr. Adimulam, Mr. Mangaba, I have another question from Monica. Our council has a problem who is responsible. Okay, now this question was asked before. She says that we don't instruct, but because it is done under our auspice, they assume we are responsible, even though we say in our letter we are not responsible. Monica is responding to Mr. Mangaba's earlier on comments, where she says our council has a problem with who is responsible for the payment of the account. The council is being charged when we are not the plaintiff. She's in response to Mr. Mangaba, she says, we do not instruct, but because it is done under our auspice, they assume we are responsible, even though we say in our letter we are not responsible. A response, please.
Thanks, Monica. I think best is that we will share with our colleagues and the profession at large to say we need to be cautious of your comment. If you do not instruct and you put it in writing that you are not instructing, therefore the plaintiff is liable for our account. So we will deal with that directly so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mangaba. Colleagues, I do not see any further questions from any participant online at the moment. I've got Mr. M.K. Naidu has just sent a question. Mr. Naidu, Sheriff, states that details, if the bargaining councils can provide details of the person who is responsible for the account, so that the sheriff can send his account for payment to that relevant persons. I guess it's a suggestion that he's making to the bargaining councils. In other words, give us details of the person who is responsible for the account so that we obviously can send our bills to them. I don't see any further. Okay, hang on, I just got one coming up now. Mr. Cherika, the interpleader issue was raised at the Johannesburg Court liaison, and the magistrates suggested that the bargaining council and CCMA should discuss it with them. So in other words, Mr. Cherika is suggesting that the bargaining council and the CCMA approach the Johannesburg Court liaison and obviously raise their concerns and queries with them so that this matter can be attended. Thank you, Mr. Cherika. See if there's any further. Mr. Henry Chow, referring to the small claims court matters, who is responsible in assisting the parties with part payment agreements? I'm sure Mr. Fortune, is Mr. Fortune online still? Mr. Fortune? He is there, but he's on mute. Unfortunately, we will raise this queries with him offline. Mr. Chow and Mr. Cherika's queries or suggestions, we'll raise it offline with Mr. Fortune. I do not see any further questions raised by bargaining councils. Not sure who's present from the various bargaining councils, but this is your opportunity to raise queries and concerns. Colleagues, I have a few, maybe members of SABFS and SAS can assist in answering these questions on behalf of the profession to the various bargaining councils. There's It has been raised by the bargaining councils to the board in regards to timelines that the sheriff has sets to execute their documents. The query was that sheriffs take too long to communicate feedback on returns of service. Sometimes you don't get a return at all, and following up with them is a nightmare. The person to help is never available. Process takes too long, and plaintiffs, especially employees, end up giving up on the process because it's too costly and takes too long. Sheriffs don't adhere to the time frame of 2 weeks for the attachment process. Sheriffs don't respond timelessly and if the sheriff responds, it's after 3 months, and we are told that the time has lapsed to pursue it. If somebody from SAS or SANAPS can assist us in responding, Mr. Adi, Mr. Andy, or Marx, or Jack. Is there any response to this question from the bargaining council? Are you online, Marx?
Yes, sir. If I may answer, sheriffs are obliged to issue returns of service, even non-service, and to communicate the outcome of the execution to the mandator. So it would be prudent that a specific arrangement be made with the sheriff's office where challenges are experienced and communicated. At the same time, our members report they also have, sometimes challenges with difficulties in contacting the bargaining council telephonically to find the correct person to speak to. So it's a give and take situation, but I think, if we can work in terms of proper communication from when you give instructions so that we know who's responsible and we know who to talk to when we need those people. But being as it may, sheriffs, we try to make a turnaround situation as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mangaba. I have a response to a suggestion from Victoria, which is the sheriff in Eastern Cape, to Monica. If the plaintiff is responsible for the payment of the sheriff's fees, then she suggests that the bargaining council sends the documents to the sheriff with the plaintiff so that the plaintiff can pay the required fee to the sheriff. But if the documents are coming from, obviously, the bargaining council, then the sheriff assumes that the bargaining council will be responsible. That is a response from Victoria, the sheriff of Eastern Cape, in Eastern Cape. To the sheriff's profession, another query that was raised by the bargaining council in terms of costing. There are charges, the sheriff's charges are very different from one sheriff to the other. Some charge as much as 14,000 rands for a removal. Are they regulated on that, or do they just charge whatever they want? There is some sheriffs in KZN wants a deposit of 3,000 rands before they can execute. Some sheriffs refuse to serve our documents unless we pay upfront for every instruction they receive. The sheriff will request the council to pay twice for going back to some addresses. Police, can I have a response on these queries raised by the bargaining councils?
Yes, sure. Sheriff's fees are regulated. However, fees for removal, storage, locksmith, towing services, etc., are linked to the market-related charges, and they may differ from one office to the other, from one city to another city, and from one province to the other. So we cannot make available the government gazette with the sheriff's tariffs. So in terms of the fees that happens in KZN is due to the general poor payment accounts. Sheriffs sometimes find themselves suffering to demand upfront payment. So our members reported that some bargaining council accounts run over 120 days in payment. So there is nothing in law that prohibits them from charging or asking for a deposit upfront before they do their work. So maybe the bargaining council also should try maybe in building a relationship with specific sheriffs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mangaba.
Mr. Burton, if I may?
Yes, you may. Yes, you may.
Who is
this? Can you introduce? Yes, Mr. Burton.
Ian Burton, Sheriff Palmridge, Alberton. I just want to follow up on your previous question in terms of timelines. What we find in our area is when the client brings in the document from the bargaining council, he is obviously the one, and he is cited as the individual to pay for the execution. Quite correctly, we demand a deposit because he does not have a 30-day credit account or an agreement with the sheriff's office. That's my first concern. Secondly, is that they've raised a complaint that some returns or some attachments lapse while it is still with the sheriff. The problem that we have with that is once the client brings in the document, we don't liaise directly with the bargaining council. We liaise with the client. So the goods are attached, we contact them. We say, guys, you need to pay X amount as a deposit for the removal to take place, because it's not the bargaining council has undertaken to pay all these costs. The client needs to pay it. He does not have the money. So what transpires is that before we get a removal instruction with the cost paid, the attachments lapse, and they are quite correct. It causes quite a delay because now the whole process needs to start from the beginning again. So it's very important, and that's why I raised the point earlier on. When the bargaining council sends an individual to the sheriff's office where the bargaining council is not the instructing party, the individual who arrives at my office must understand what the process might be for the foreseeable future, so that he is not surprised by the advertisement costs. I have a matter now where an individual has instructed me to remove, but the goods that have been attached are heavy-duty equipment. The quote to remove those goods is 150,000 Rand via heavy-duty lifting equipment. How in heaven's name is he going to do that? He already does not have the money. So it's quite important that the bargaining council also understands the predicaments faced by the sheriff, because the sheriff, as a sheriff, cannot fork out 150,000 Rand on behalf of a client where I'm not a party to the action, which it's very unfair then to penalize the sheriff and say the sheriff is delaying or the matter. Then when it comes to the removal charges, like I need to confirm what Mark said, it is important to realize that it differs from area to area. I cannot send out a team of people with a truck to load 50,000 Rand worth of assets if I don't have a deposit in my account from the client. But unfortunately, it does differ. We request for a removal, my office, 3,500 Rand up front. The deposit prior, that's after attachment, prior to removal. But that is when the plaintiff is paying for this whole action and not the bargaining council. So that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Just to enhance the explanation given by Mr. Burton and Mr. Mangava, I have a comment from Ms. June Thomas, who says, with regards to removals and charges, the bargaining council must note that most of the sheriffs are contracted to a removal company, and taking into consideration the challenges and problems we encounter with the respondents with regards to removals, a detailed return of service should be rendered to the bargaining council to substantiate the costing. I hope that assists the bargaining council further. Colleagues, if Mr. Burton, thank you very much. I have a further question raised by the bargaining council with the South African Board for Sheriffs. If members can give me a response. In terms of legal, the various bargaining councils requested a response to these. Sheriffs are not up to date with the law. To date, some sheriffs still do not know the Labor Relations Act as amended in 2015, where enforcement of award end with the CCMA, and no need for us to issue a writ through the Labor Court. They still expect writs from the Labor Court. Can we, I'm just going to read one more before I afford you the opportunity to respond. Sheriffs failed to follow the law, and by releasing the attachment made just on mere allegation that the attached goods does not belong to the debtor, without following the interpleader proceedings as they should under the circumstances, and without being provided with a proof of ownership for the assets allegedly belonging to somebody else than the debtor himself or herself. Can we have a response, please? Mr. Mangava, Andy, Mr. Burton.
Alan, if I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sure.
I think it's very important that that we understand this. When we work with a CCMA award, I again say that that we have we've got an arrangement, or the CCMA has given us clear instructions that they will not entertain interpleaders when goods are attached. They have lately informed us that we must refer the client to legal aid to then approach the competent court or the court in that area to attend to interpleaders. The sheriff is not the person making the decision of ownership, and therefore we do not demand proof of ownership. The rules are very clear. The claimant must provide us with an affidavit. The ownership will be decided by a court of law and not the sheriff, because he has no discretion in that action. So it's important that we get to a point where the magistrate courts in our jurisdictions will assist us, whether they open a dummy file under a specific case number and then file it for interpleader. In our jurisdiction, we are busy discussing this with the court to assist us, because we are prejudicing the clients by not being able to provide them with a service.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. If you could put your camera off, please. I have a question, maybe a suggestion by Ms. Komotso Mpashlele, the Sheriff of Sandton. The question of removal costs should also be taken into account: the extended time spent, assets to be removed, resources required. These factors impact on the removal cost. I'm presuming that Ms. Komotso is responding to the 14,000 Rand removal costs or query raised by the Bargaining Council. She says that the Bargaining Council must take into account that the time spent, the type of assets that is being removed, and the resources required for the removal of these assets. That will determine the amount allocated to the removal costs. I have a comment from Ms. Jack Cherika. My comment was going to be that the sheriff has an obligation to serve and execute in terms of the Sheriff's Act, High Court Act, Magistrates Court Act. The sheriff is then having to bear the costs, even if he owes back his return by way of lien. But the Act has not changed. It's a comment from Mr. Jack Cherika. I'm going to move on to the next question, or next query raised by the CCMA. That is by the Bargaining Council, sorry. Uniform handling of Section 143 processing. Councils in the public service handle the process of Section 143 differently. Inquiries in relation to Rule 38(1) in terms of the Magistrates Court Act 32 of 1944, the CCMA affords assistance in relation to the security required for employees earning below the threshold. Bargaining councils do not assist in this regard. That's just a comment. Sheriff returned our enforcement award in Bloemfontein and Kimberley, saying they did not have a labor court stamp. Even after providing proof that they could enforce the award as per the Labor Relations Amendments Act, they still refuse to assist. I'm going to read the other question. Sheriffs are working in cahoots with the debtors by not attaching assets found and pointed out to them at the premises, and claiming on the return that there are no assets to be attached. The council's agents, upon verification, mostly find otherwise. The sheriffs thereafter expect to be paid on the return, which is found to be dishonest. Mr. Mangaba, do you want to answer? Mr. Mangaba, are you there? Andy, are you there? Can we have a response, please? Anybody can respond, Mr. Mangaba?
Sorry, Alan, I'm back. It was just my screen was frozen. Your first question, uniform rules. It's I think the statement is a little bit too vague there.
Okay.
And,
can you answer this question? Sheriffs returned our enforcement awards in Bloemfontein and Kimberley, saying that they did not have a labor court stamp. Even after providing proof that they could enforce the awards as per the Labor Relations Act, Amendment Act, they still refuse to assist.
Please start your video, Mr. Mangaba.
Are you there, Mr. Mangaba?
That's it. I'm back. You see, we need a little bit of more training, Vincent. We just get lost along the way. Okay, the sheriff in Bloemfontein issue, it is within the sheriff, in terms of training. We look at the training, and I think the Bargaining Council sometimes is right that we need to revisit this Labor Relations Act, because most of the documents that come to my office also, we still have a problem. They are not stamped, they are not signed, but it's an enforcement award. So I think that we need to look at what the law requires in that effect, that a document issued by the court should have a stamp and a signature just to confirm validity of that. So I don't know if the sheriff in Bloemfontein, what did they experience with the document that was presented to them? But as such, is that maybe the bargaining council should also try bring their part in confirmation of the authenticity of such documents. Thank you.
I agree with you that training could be one of the possible solutions to the problem. The next question raised is sheriffs are working in cahoots with the debtors by not attaching assets found and pointed out to them at the premises and claiming on their return that there are no assets to be attached. The council's agents, upon verification, mostly find otherwise. Sheriffs thereafter expect to be paid on the return, which is found to be dishonest. Any comments?
There's a serious allegation to say that sheriffs are working in coercion. Sheriffs are impartial officers of the court. And one day you can picture into your house, there's a green launch suite. After attaching that green launch suite, the day of removal, it's a brown launch suite. So people go about to mislead the sheriff in terms of covering their tracks and all that. But it is a serious allegation that we need to look into as a profession in terms of sheriffs that are not performing. But as it is, a return of service is as an affidavit that confirms what the sheriff has done and what the sheriff has found. And the return, therefore, is enough evidence that can be used against him if he found to be as misleaded in the process. But as it is therefore an issue that a third person can be reported and drastic measures can be taken against him. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mangaba. Can you put your video off, please? Next question I have, time frames and feedback. Sometimes when the office of the sheriff is contacted for a feedback, the council agents are told that the file is with the sheriff or the deputy and won't furnish us with the information, and the sheriff won't call the council and give feedback. Next question, the next query is sheriffs refusing to email returns, just want to use post. One sheriff in Pretoria, you don't get a return until you submit new work, only to find you owe them for the work previously submitted. Can we have a response? Anybody there? Mr. Burton, if you want to respond, you're most welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Morrigan. It's very difficult to respond to the previous question and this question because this is very generalized, and to say all sheriffs are working with debtors in cahoots, it's generalized, so it's combing all sheriffs under the same comb, if I can call it that way. I think it's very important for the bargaining council as well to understand that the sheriff makes use of a deputy to go out to the premises, and I, as the sheriff, am totally reliant on what he provides as information in his return. I think the best way to do this is to contact the sheriff directly and not to liaise with the deputy once there's a complaint. So the sheriff can go with the deputy to the address and go investigate what has transpired. Because a false return is a very, very serious allegation. It can cost you your job. So I think it's very important that a person must understand to generalize everything is very dangerous, because not all sheriffs are the same. Not all sheriffs run their offices the same. And then when it comes back to the feedback, once again, I think it is important that they contact the sheriff directly. If they go to the sheriff's website, the SA Board for Sheriffs, and you search the sheriff's contact details are there. If you do not get satisfaction with the sheriff's office, with the admin staff, contact the sheriff directly on the cell phone number that is listed on the website. I think it will take away a lot of the time spent trying to get somebody to contact you or leaving messages. Rather go directly to the person in charge of that office and do that by visiting the Sheriff's website.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Burton. If you can put your video off. I have a comment from Ms. June Thomas. There is a lot of fraudulent activities taking place. I guess the sheriff wanted to protect his or her interest with requesting for the document to be stamped. Documents has to be checked properly before serving or executing. I guess that is a response to the sheriff being cautious when receiving documents from plaintiffs or the bargaining council. To the sheriff's profession, I have another query raised by the bargaining councils. I didn't specify which, I'm not specifying which bargaining council because there are a number of bargaining councils who raised queries with the board, okay? So just to assist them, we obviously just going to read the questions out. They say poor quality of work. The sheriff claiming he or she won't find the address cited on the writ of execution, but when the agent goes to confirm, the address is found to exist. We dealt with this one earlier on. Sheriffs who do not call plaintiff while at the premises where they must do attachment and removal. They send returns stating that they could not locate anyone or that goods were of no value, but don't say what kind of goods they found so we can make an informed decision. The sheriff will respond that the business has changed hands and won't investigate whether the business was sold as a going concern or not. Mr. Mangaba, you want to answer? Mr. Mangaba, are you online still?
Yes, colleague, I'm still here. If you can just rephrase
your video, please, Mr. Mangaba.
Okay, video, please. The question is, sheriffs who do not call plaintiff while at the premises where they must do an attachment and removal. They send returns stating that they could not locate anyone or that goods were of no value, but they don't say what kind of goods they found so we can make an informed decision. The sheriff will respond that the business has changed hands and won't investigate whether the business was sold as a going concern or not. Can you respond, Mr. Mangaba?
Yes, colleague. It's a real challenge, you know, when it comes to execution. And it is important to provide clear and correct addresses to the sheriff to avoid situation where you find that the sheriff cannot find the address. And we are now on Android and we use our GPSs, we try as much as possible. And we are aware of the agents of the bargaining council interact with the employer. Therefore, any additional information such as telephone numbers, names of directors, you know, senior staff members, that is information that we will need, that will help us if we are going out with their documents. But, you know, sometimes the document is just a an enforcement award with no information, and that makes it a little bit difficult for us to proceed to other addresses. And as previously as I alluded, that we are being misled. Everybody, I don't want to say anything like lies, but people misrepresent them whenever a sheriff is in front of them. So they allege that they are the other people that we don't know. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I have for the benefit of the bargaining council, I have a comment from Mr. Enric Tau. He says that the bargaining council, if you can put your camera off, video off, Mr. Mangaba. He says, Mr. Enric Tau says that in the bargaining council matters where the writ was executed and properly attached, assets properly attached, the bargaining council takes too long to give further instructions for removal and sale in execution. Then the attachment has lapsed. The return and inventory was sent immediately after execution and the attachment. How will you deal with this as the bargaining council refuses to pay for a new attachment? It's something that the bargaining council must take note of in terms of responding with further instructions to the sheriff. Remember, in the magistrate's court, the attachment lasts for 4 months. So obviously, the bargaining council needs to respond immediately. The attachment is sent to them with further instructions to the sheriffs.
Mr. Merrigan?
Yes, sir.
Sorry to disturb you. If the deputy chairperson of the bargaining councils is still available, maybe she could comment.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. You're most welcome to
You can hear
respond.
me? Yes, thank you. I'm
Yes.
still here. I'm listening. It's just that some of the questions or comments I feel really covered.
Please put this on your video, ma'am.
Can you see me now?
No, we can't.
I don't know how to do these things.
We got your address on here. Okay, you can respond, ma'am. It's fine. Hello. You're most welcome to respond with your video off. Oh, you're on mute now. You're on mute.
I think it's very important that we meet with the sheriffs. That is the bargaining councils in those areas and the sheriffs, because what we're experiencing here is maybe there's a problem to differentiate between who's the plaintiff. In some cases, bargaining councils themselves are the plaintiff, where the company maybe refuses to pay the levies of the council. We are the plaintiff. And when we send the writ to the sheriff, we explain that we are not responsible. You know, I've answered letters from different sheriffs, especially Jamiston. They'll say, please pay. I said, we are not the plaintiff. We even wrote on the writ that the plaintiff, the person who's bringing this paper, is responsible for payment. But well, it's not, it's like, you know, but I'm just happy that this thing took place, this meeting took place, you know, because now there is a direction. And what I'm requesting is that the contacts of these gentlemen or the people that we're talking to, like Mr. Mangaba and Mr. Button, you know, it's important that we should get the contacts, because now I know who to talk to, because it frustrates. And at least I'm happy now. I understand why do we have to pay 10,000 in one area and we pay 3,000 in one area. I'm clear today. But my request is that let's have more meetings rather than reporting to head board of sheriffs in Cape Town. Let's meet here. Let's meet in Johannesburg. You know, with the person who's the head. You know, the person that we can go to and say, this is the problem that I'm having, rather than having people having these allegations. There's a very serious allegation. At one stage, I went to Pinoni. The sheriff just said, this address does not exist. I said, Sheriff, do you mind going with me? And he said, yes. When he went, I said, this is the place. Then why are you saying? So I think that is the way to resolve, rather than just throwing allegations, you know, that are hateful sometimes. But I think we should hold meetings so that we can clarify these things to people who are responsible for the sheriffs. The reason we had to talk to you in Cape Town is because we were so frustrated. We just didn't know who to talk to, you know, what to do. But I'm happy this happened, because I have a very clear, I'm very clear in my mind now as to where do we go now as the NABC if you have problems. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. I just lost my connection here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Mr. Morrigan,
okay. Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Just give me a second, please, colleagues. Just give me a second. Before you go further, I had a query from Estelle, who says, if the bargaining council is not the plaintiff or paying the account, the returns of service might have been sent to the paying client, being the plaintiff. I suggest that the bargaining council should not generalize, as these are extremely serious allegations. I suggest if the bargaining councils don't get any feedback from the sheriff, the bargaining council are welcome to contact the South African Board for Sheriffs to intervene or lay a complaint. That is a suggestion from Estelle, the sheriff in Cape Town. I have, ma'am, while you're still online, I have a comment by Mr. Jack Cherika, who says, it seems to imply that the sheriff must do the investigatory work for the council. And Mrs. Root responded by saying, a sheriff is independent and does not represent the plaintiff or the defendant while executing. Sheriff must strictly follow the rules while executing. I guess in responding in regard to the issue of the sheriffs establishing whether companies have changed hands and obviously doing the investigation in regards to how the company changed hands and what process has been followed. Those are the responses I have. Thank you very much. I have just one more question to the sheriff's profession from the Bargaining Council. I guess this is another repeat, but I'm going to ask the question so that the particular Bargaining Council is aware that we have raised their concern. It says lack of understanding. Sheriff refuses to serve our enforcement award documents and expects the enforcement to be on the CCMA letterhead, even if a Bargaining Council is different from the CCMA, although accredited by the CCMA. So it seems like sheriffs are not understanding that the Bargaining Council is independent from the CCMA and insisting on the instructing letter coming with the enforcement award by the CCMA. We will take that into account, and obviously a number of these queries raised can be addressed via a newsletter to the profession from the board, which will as a moderator, I'll suggest to the board to engage the profession via a newsletter and highlight these concerns to the profession. I have a comment from Ms. Annalie Erasmus, the Sheriff in KZN. She says engaging with each other is clearly very important. We are hearing many issues that are unfortunately very vague. I want to suggest that we all start by addressing specific issues directly with each other. If then we have specific issues that are not resolved, we should have a system of referral, specific persons on each side who can take the matter further for resolution. I guess that's a very good suggestion made by Mrs. Erasmus in response to our Vice Chairperson there. We will definitely take that. I don't see any further comments from the profession or any participant. I want to give an opportunity to the Vice Chairperson of the National Bargaining Council to just highlight any further concerns she has, any suggestions she wants to make to the sheriff's profession. Madam, you have a lot of sheriffs present here today. You have sheriffs from all corners of the country, and your voice can be heard today. And obviously, whatever you want to suggest or recommend to the sheriff's profession will definitely reach sheriffs all over the country. So I'm going to give you the floor, ma'am, to obviously address us if you want to address us any further on the comments, suggestions, queries raised by the sheriff's profession.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Thank you very much. I think this was an eye-opener, really. I think this was long overdue that we talked to the Board of Sheriffs, because we had so many misunderstandings. Like I've said, you know, Mrs. Erasmus, I really agree with that. We should have more meetings in order to clarify. There are changes in the Labor Relations Act. There are changes in the Sheriff's Board Act that we do not know about. So the more we meet, because we are assisting each other, we are assisting the industry, we are still assisting the employees in the industry, in the individual bargaining councils. But what I'd like to say is that I really thank you for clarifications. It really answered many questions that we had, and I just wish that we meet in regional spaces, like I've said, in Gauteng, Pretoria, meet in those areas and know who to contact in case of problems. We really don't need to go to the Board of Sheriffs in Cape Town to report. It's not a matter of reporting somebody who has done something wrong. It's a matter of working together in order to resolve problems that we are meeting with. But all in all, thank you for all who participated, and I believe we're going to have a very good relationship from now going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. Okay, the profession, Ms. June Thomas, has requested your contact details as well. We will obviously forward the contact details of all participants after this workshop to the various stakeholders. That will be done, Ms. Thomas. Before I close up the session, I see the questions or the responses are flooding in all of a sudden. Mr. Mangaba states, I understand that my question is more related to the rules board, but due to the High Court execution, is it possible to have a minimum amount that one can claim? Minimum removal cost around is giving R1,000 figure here, but he's suggesting that the fees be looked at and obviously discussed with the various parties. The Annalie Erasmus says that maybe the local sheriffs associations can assist the various bargaining councils in the regions with in regards to contact details for sheriffs and any assistance that they require. That's a further help given to you, ma'am. Before I close this session, I've actually noted one query being raised quite often through the session, and as a practicing sheriff myself, I seem to misunderstand the bargaining council's view in that when they say that they are not responsible for paying the sheriff's fees, I'm personally a bit confused with that. Maybe the bargaining council can look at their relationship in regards to a relationship and role in regards to sending or forwarding documents to the sheriff, because over time and through my experience as a practicing sheriff in Durban, whenever a sheriff receives enforcement awards or in the past labor court writs from a bargaining council, it was taken that the bargaining council is responsible for everything. We have no contact with the plaintiff at all. We are instructed by the bargaining council, we are paid by the bargaining council, and obviously once the process is finalized, the sheriff accounts to the bargaining council. So I'm actually misunderstanding or maybe trying to figure out the relationship the bargaining council wants to have in regards to engaging with the sheriff. It's something that I picked up through the discussion. Maybe the bargaining councils can obviously look into this, whether they are now changing the process in regards to who engages with the sheriff and who the sheriff takes instructions from. Because currently, I understand the process to be, if I get 5 enforcement awards from the textile bargaining council, it's coming from the bargaining council. So my instructing party is the bargaining council. And obviously, when we distribute proceeds, we then are given details from the bargaining council who we pay and how we pay. So it's something that I picked up, Madam Chair, for you to look at. And if it's a new process that you're implementing, then the profession should be made aware of your new approach to the process. Colleagues, participants, Madam Chair, I want to thank all participants, the Ms. Ashika Singh from the Department of Justice, Mr. Clive Fortune, the Executive Manager of the Board, our 2 chairpersons of the Sheriff's Associations, Mrs. Ruth, Mrs. Thomas, Mr. Jack Cherika, all sheriffs present, Mr. Mangaba, Mr. Ian Burton, and Mr. Andy Adimulum for your presentations, and generally all participants present today. It was a very fruitful engagement, and I'm hoping that as the member of the board, we can, and as the board, we can further enhance this discussion in some way or the other, so that whatever has been discussed here today can be, the queries can be positively responded to, and a difference is made in terms of service delivery, especially for the bargaining council. We appreciate and understand your role in terms of assisting these vulnerable employees. Mr. Nell and his team, thank you very much for your continuous guidance and assistance to the sheriff's profession. Colleagues, with that, I want to say thank you very much to all participants, and have a good day further. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.